Hello, and welcome back to yet another video. This is the 5th episode of the story in which Naruto decides to start learning sealing arts. Like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get this show started. Kakashi wasn't particularly happy to have been called to the Hokage's office. Again. He found it utterly ridiculous that he'd met with the Hokage more during his months as a Junin sensei than during his years as an Anbu captain. This was almost certainly because there was a command structure for Anbu captains. They reported to the heads of their divisions, who in turn reported to the Anbu chief, who reported to the Hokage. No structured reporting system at all for Junin sensei. He couldn't imagine how much of the Hokage's time was eaten up dealing with it all, and, while it was likely occasionally entertaining, if most Junin got up to even a tenth of what his did, he could see the attraction of the occasional hands-on reports. The fact of the matter was that most Junin teams spent the better part of 6 months doing nothing more taxing than a drank mission. So he wasn't entirely certain why the Hokage insisted on handing those out himself, when there was certainly a more efficient system. Passing the final security check to be allowed into the Hokage's suite, Kakashi smiled at the secretary. New this week, he noted. A particularly curvy, nubile number. The Hokage was a dirty old man. He knew she couldn't be nearly as vacuous as her expression indicated, not when Anbu took turns serving as one of the Hokage's last lines of defense, but whoever was impersonating the secretary this week had the act down particularly well. Hokage-sama is waiting for you, Kakashi-senpai, she said with a giggle, twirling a pen through her fingers in front of her in such a way as to highlight her assets. Kunoichi then, he decided, as most Shinobi even when they knew they would be impersonating a woman didn't bother learning Kunoichi tricks. He let his attention be drawn exactly where she had directed and admired the view for a few moments. Because even if it was fake, it was still a nice view. Then he nodded and headed into the office. It came as a brief surprise to find the office already full, and with most of Konoha's most important figures, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Yomi, the current Anbu chief who was, of course, wearing the black mask that signified his rank. Kakashi didn't know the chief's true identity. Nobody but the Hokage ever did, because once they donned the black mask, their former identity was subsumed by it. The mask never came off even in sleep. They lived in dedicated space at Anbu headquarters, and they took on the name Yomi until they died or retired. Nobody really knew how many had served as Yomi over the years, and guesses ran anywhere from 5 to 5 dozen. He supposed it didn't truly matter, as the Yomi were largely viewed as interchangeable. Urban legend among the new Anbu recruits said that there was only ever one Yomi, straight from the pits of the underworld he'd been named after, who would never age, never die, and whose sole purpose was to make their lives misery. A pretty myth, but Kakashi supposed it served the chief. For himself, Kakashi was reasonably certain that this was the second Yomi since he'd been aware enough to pay attention. He attributed the appearances of seamless transition to a lengthy one, spanning at least 2 years, with the new Yomi slowly stepping in more and more until all of the duties had been transferred to his shoulders. "Ano, am I late?" Kakashi asked, glancing around the room again as he rubbed at the back of his head. With this crowd, being late wouldn't be fun. "If you are, then I am, too," Taka said, coming straight in and sitting in one of the 2 remaining chairs. The High Jounin hadn't served on active duty as a field shinobi in more than 20 years, so even though he'd been facing away from the door, Kakashi hadn't been startled by his entrance. He did, however, become even more intrigued by why they might have all been brought together like this. And especially why he'd been asked to join. Because if the Hokage were going to press him to be his successor again and had this entire group behind him, well, he could still decline, but it would be much more difficult. He nervously took his seat and looked to Jiraiya for a clue, but the older man just shook his head. The Hokage set his pipe down on a dish on his desk and steepled his hands in front of him. "I have just received confirmation that this will be the largest Chunin exam in history," the third began. "In fact, of the great shinobi nations, only Earth has declined. I believe this in large part due to your team, Kakashi." Kakashi cocked his head curiously. "Ah, you think my team somehow caused Earth to decline?" If so, he had no idea how that was possible. Well, other than Stone somehow finding out what even Naruto didn't, and then he'd have thought they'd send as many Junin teams as possible to try to kill him. "No, I think the Great Naruto Lagoon and the Great Naruto Bridge are responsible for Cloud and Mist accepting," the Hokage clarified. "And I believe that if there were even slightly less animosity between us, even Stone would have sent an official team." "Oh, well." Kakashi trailed off, unsure of the best way to reply. "This has led to increased participation from our allies and normal participants, who do not want to be outshone and possibly lose revenue to the great nations any more than they already do. Which leads us to the current state of affairs. We're going to have roughly 70 foreign teams participating, which means an equal number of foreign jounin and more than 200 foreign jinan, Takan interjected. The logistics alone of hosting that many foreigners is troublesome, not to mention running an exam for what will be more than 100 teams once we get the final count of our own in there. But even worse, it's going to be a security nightmare. On top of that, my most trusted intelligence analyst has been reviewing reports. In fact, yours, Kakashi, in which you submitted recording your own conclusions as to the failure of the mission to protect the Haruno caravan and your strongly worded views as to its initial assessment, was one of the integral factors, Yomi said, voice muffled by the mask. And my analysts have concluded there is at least one hidden village preparing for armed conflict with us. Put more finely, war. Kakashi closed his eyes momentarily, assimilating what he'd just been told and adjusting to it. He knew it was unreasonable to hope his students wouldn't have to see it, but he'd hoped they wouldn't have to quite so young. But such was the life of a shinobi. So there will likely be war, the Hokage said. Though we don't know from which side, and we don't know when. It will be most likely that our enemies will use the Chunin exams to gauge our strength. So let us give them something to think on which may make them reconsider. Kakashi nodded in agreement even as he mourned what was certainly going to be the end of Konoha's easy peacetime. Konoha at war was a different village, and one he wasn't looking forward to living in again. Jiraiya, Tsunade, your return to Konoha hasn't been a closely guarded secret, but it hasn't been advertised yet. We will be changing that during the opening of the Chunin exams, the Hokage said. It was clear this was not a suggestion. Of course, Jiraiya agreed. Though if it's who I think it is behind this, I think that will make aggression more likely instead of less. The Hokage grimaced, and Kakashi realized Jiraiya had meant Orochimaru. Interesting, as he was a missing nin, so not part of a village capable of mounting an attack. Terrifying, because Orochimaru was one of the Sannin, and one of the best shinobi Konoha had ever produced. Kakashi, do you believe there might be any difficulty with your team making it to the finals? The Hokage asked. Kakashi tilted his head and considered all he knew about Konoha's Jinan and what he could extrapolate about the shinobi all of the other nations might feasibly be able to send as Jinan. Not unless they managed to pass a Jounin as a member of one of the teams, Kakashi concluded. I am not certain they would lose against a very young Jounin, but one backed up by two Jinan or, more likely, two Chunin, would likely cause significant problems. Of course, if they did face that kind of opposition, they'd be more likely to fall back and proceed in an alternate fashion. And even many Jounin would have difficulty finding my team when they wanted to hide. And if Kakashi's voice hinted at how proud he was over that fact, well, he figured it was his due. We'll be vetting the teams, Yomi spoke up. They'll be able to slip in Chunin who are young enough since we don't want to show anyone how good our intelligence on foreign village shinobi is, but we'll be denying entry to any and all Jounin, regardless of age. Taka grinned, tilting his chair back far enough that Kakashi wondered if he was using chakra to keep from tipping over. Because if we didn't do that, they'd think we either knew far more or far less than we do, he said. Good, the Hokage said. Since your team has raised foreign interests, I expect them to give an exceptional showing. Understood? Kakashi nodded. Then you're dismissed. I believe Taka wanted a word with you. When the others had left, the Hokage picked his pipe back up and relit it. Jiraiya glared the whole time. If it really is Orochimaru who is behind the movements against Konoha, it is very likely he will attempt to strike at me directly, the Hokage said. Jiraiya glared harder. Because of course it was Orochimaru and all of the problems associated with him that were coming home to roost, and of course he would make every effort to kill his old sensei. It seemed the old man still had something of a blind spot when it came to the one who'd been his favorite student. I know what you're going to ask, and the answer is no, he said, hoping to preempt the entire conversation. Once upon a time, he'd wanted to be Hokage more than he'd wanted to breathe. And once upon a time, the third had told him in no uncertain terms that if any of his students was going to succeed him, it would be the genius of them, so he should concentrate on more realistic aspirations. Like simply making Jounin. Jiraiya wasn't sure he'd ever forgiven him for that. Then again, he wasn't sure he'd ever have come so far as a shinobi if he hadn't had that push behind him. And he wasn't sure the old man hadn't known that all along. And that was what had really burned, after he'd started wondering about that. Manipulative old bastard. Unfortunately, he didn't seem moved by the statement, and just puffed on his pipe. I mean it, old man, if you kick the bucket, I'm not taking your desk, Jiraiya said. And don't look at me, Tsunade said. I'm not even active duty. Can you imagine any of the Shinobi Corps actually accepting me? If it's got to be one of us, I vote Jiraiya. Tsunadeheim has the name, Jiraiya pointed out. Senju still means a lot in Konoha, no matter that you've been doing field research into advanced healing practices for the past few years. Tsunade looked at him sourly. I was not, she countered. I was gambling and drinking and doing my best to forget this village even existed. And while that might be technically true, you can rest assured that my version of events is the one that has been spread throughout Konoha, Fire, and the Elemental Nations, Jiraiya said, a small grin on his face at getting one over on Tsunade. Only give weight by you're immediately starting an Arianen school upon your return. Which just goes to show you're better suited to be Hokage than I am, if you can manage that feat, Tsunade rejoined. It was Jiraiya's turn to look sour. They both turned to their old sensei, who was watching them in amusement as he made smoke circles. Jiraiya hated when the Hokage used silence to make his arguments for him. He hated it more when it was so effective. Don't give me that look, Jiraiya said. I absolutely, categorically, undeniably refuse. Same here. The job's a damn death sentence, and I'm not nearly fool enough to take the hot seat, Tsunade agreed. They sat in silence for a good minute, neither he nor Tsunade willing to give an inch. Finally, the Hokage sighed, set down his pipe, and turned to the window. Jiraiya's attention was drawn, of course, to the Hokage monument the window framed perfectly. And as always, his gaze fell to Minato, who'd fallen so far before his time. Neither of you are my ideal successor, the Hokage finally spoke. But my first choice died long ago, and the one I would like to appoint is almost as against the idea as the both of you are. All I ask is that, should I fall before he is ready to take over, you not allow Konoha to fall with me and that one of you step in until he is ready. Regardless of your issues with me, I trust that you care enough for certain individuals in this village to act to prevent what would certainly be their own deaths if someone else in this village were to capitalize on events. Jiraiya kicked the desk hard enough to split the wood and stormed out. While typically the only opening ceremony was held prior to the final tournament, it was highly likely that some of the villages would be completely eliminated before the final round of exams, and the Hokage had wanted to spread his message as widely as possible. Kakashi still wasn't entirely certain what that message was, other than the general Konoha is strong. He supposed that with the threat of war heavy in the air, that might be message enough. Regardless, the Hokage had wanted an opening ceremony before the exams began, so an opening ceremony was what he got. Kakashi, with his many years of service, had seen more than his fair share of ceremonial events and so often found all the pomp and circumstance more irritating and bothersome than anything else. But even so, he was reluctantly impressed by the spectacle the Hokage had managed to put on. Taka had solved the logistical problems of hosting so many foreigners by creating a camp outside the village walls for each ninja village that had sent a team to participate. The camps weren't nearly as comfortable as a hotel would have been, but they were better than the rough sleeping shinobi on missions were used to. And with the multiple Anbu teams stationed to each camp ostensibly for their own protection from the other campsite was also a brilliant solution to keeping tabs on them all without their being able to object. Because as much as it was being used as a smokescreen for their own spying, there was enough animosity between some of the villages that it held just enough truth to make everyone slightly less jumpy to know that everyone's locations were being tracked, including their enemies. More than just the Anbu were watching them at the moment, though, as the Hokage had decided a parade would start things off nicely. So the foreigners walked team by team from the trade gate to the arena down a pathway lined with every Chunin Konoha could spare. That turned out to be quite a lot of Chunin. Kakashi wondered whether some of them weren't Anbu and clerical nins thrown into the formal Chunin uniform just for the day to create the spectacle. The crowds of civilians who hadn't been able to get a seat in the arena cheering and gawking behind that line of still and silent shinobi only added to the rather ostentatious display. A display in which he was about to grudgingly partake. He pulled at the sleeves of his own formal uniform and glared at Sakura for a moment. "Stop tugging at it, sensei," Sakura chided, eyes never leaving the mist nins she was watching. "I wouldn't have to if you hadn't sent it to the cleaners," he said. "It's just been gathering dust for the past few years." Exactly. Kakashi would have rolled his eyes if he hadn't been cataloging how one of the foreign jounin moved for later extrapolation and analysis. He did take the time to give his boys the eye as they sniggered at the exchange. He rather thought they should be on his side in this particular exchange, commiserating with him over sleeves that were just a hair too short and pants that had the slightest bit too much starch in them to be completely comfortable. In fact, the only plus to a jounin's formals that he could see was that the longer coat allowed him to hide away a good deal more weaponry than the jounin vest did. That didn't even begin to make up for the inordinate detriments, though. Then the last of the foreigners had made their way down to the arena, and it was time for the Konoha contingent to make its presence known. He ran his eye over them all, Amused by the mixture of nervous fidgeting, terrified silence, and utter boredom that ran through the ranks. 30 Konoha teams would participate, and while he didn't know how many of them would make it to the finals, he was certain that it would be at least as many as all the foreigners combined. He and the Hyjounen had spent hours going over the strengths and weaknesses of all of the Konoha teams and had at least 1,000 contingency plans to make sure of it. Chunin exams were more exercises in foreign relations than truly about selecting Chunin, after all, and it wouldn't do for Konoha to have a poor showing at home. So if some Konoha teams were given furtive assistance passing from one exam to the next, and some foreign teams were surreptitiously sabotaged, well, so long as nobody was caught at it, nobody would cry foul. Not when they all did the same when they had home court advantage. "Ready?" he asked his kids, knowing they were. He'd made it very clear to Taka and the planning committee that his team wouldn't be in any need of special extra assistance. "Course we are, Kage-sensei," Naruto said, bouncing on the balls of his feet as though his body couldn't quite contain his eagerness. Sakura nodded and smiled at him brightly as Sasuke made a noise that he'd come to understand was his version of enthusiastic agreement. "Good, Kakashi replied. The dull buzz of the crowd became a screaming roar as the first of the Konoha teams stepped into the parade, and it was time. He grinned and ruffled the boy's hair, only grinning wider at Naruto's indignant protest and Sasuke's disgruntled glare, patted Sakura on the shoulder, and darted off to their place in line before any of them could consider retribution. It was later that afternoon when Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura stood in front of the building where the Chunin exams were scheduled to begin. They looked from the line of Genin waiting to get in, to each other, and back again. The never-ending ceremony had been bad enough, none of them had any desire to stand and wait in a never-ending line. "Roof?" Sakura suggested. The boys nodded and Naruto tilted his head for them to follow. Sakura and Sasuke had learned long ago during missions to capture the daimyo's wife's Katora that Naruto had an incredibly detailed mental map of all of Konoha's streets and back alleys. He led them away from the testing building through a handful of back passageways to one that was hidden enough for them to make their jump to the roofs without all the other Genin seeing them. Then they were up to the top and a few short leaps took them back to the testing building. "Either of you see the roof hatch?" Sakura asked, looking around for the feature which was a common installation in Konoha's buildings, especially those frequented by shinobi. "Over here," Sasuke called as he found it and pulled it open. From there, it was easy for them to find the third floor and the correct room for them to turn in their tickets and wait for the exam to begin. There were only a handful of teams already there waiting. An older-looking Konoha Genin approached them, and Sasuke and Sakura automatically fell in beside Naruto. "Hey, Konoha rookies, eh?" the guy said. "I'm Yakushi Kabuto. Also a Genin, as you can see." He gestured to his forehead protector. "I've taken the exam 7 times now, so if you have any questions, I might be able to help." "No, Kabuto-senpai," Sakura said, voice pitched like a cute girl's instead of the kunoichi she was. It was one of Naruto's favorite cons, as with her bubblegum pink hair and an artful application of eyeliner that made her eyes look enormous, quite literally everyone fell for it. He only wished he could pull it off, too. "To take it 7 times, your team must be really experienced. Will all of the teams participating this year be as experienced as your team?" "Oh, some of them undoubtedly," he said, scratching the back of his head in apparent embarrassment. Naruto wondered what this guy's game was. He'd never been old enough to pull the embarrassed expert routine, but he'd seen it often enough to recognize it when it was being used. But to use it on him, of all people. He was almost insulted that someone would try such an obvious hook on him. "But there are sure to be a number of rookies like yourselves, as well. Was there anyone in particular you were interested in learning more about?" He pulled a deck of cards out of his pouch. "Cards?" Sasuke asked, looking at them curiously. "Ah, they're special cards," Kabuto said. "I've managed to gather some information about most of the participants this year, and I've transcribed them onto these cards. They're blank," Naruto said from behind him. Kabuto whirled around in surprise. "They require my chakra to activate them and show their contents," Kabuto explained, trying to get back into control. "For example, let's look at one of your cards, shall we?" He pulled one out and lit it up with his chakra. "Uchiha Sasuke," he read. 2 ranked missions, 4 cranked missions, 67 dranked mission. My, that's quite a bit for rookie Genin. Naruto frowned. There was no way a simple Genin should have access to mission logs to allow him that sort of information. At least, not outside infiltrating the Hokage's tower. He scrunched his nose for a moment at the hypocrisy of doubting someone else's loyalty for something he himself had so recently done, then decided it was completely justified. When they'd done it, Their first loyalty hadn't been to Konoha, either. Not that the Hokage would ever be told that. The lecture the old man had given them after Kakashi had made them confess to him were bad enough. The lecture, and subsequent training and demonstrations, from Kakashi had been much worse. He shuddered as he recalled them, and how firmly Kakashi had shot down the idea that any Jonin, no matter how talented, brilliant, or well-trained, could break into the Hokage's tower without leaving any trace. If Kabuto had done so, as the info cards indicated, then either Kakashi was wrong or Kabuto was not a Jonin. And if Naruto were a betting man, which he most certainly was, then he knew where he'd lay odds. Naruto wasn't entirely sure what exactly this Kabuto was, but he knew something about the older Jonin wasn't right. So they made a bit of small talk until the other rookies came barging in, Ino darting over to practically tackle Sasuke. Naruto's foot in the right place made sure they all toppled over, creating the distraction needed to slip his fingers into Kabuto's equipment pouch and take the deck of cards before the older Jonin wandered off. That he also enjoyed watching her tumble gracelessly to the floor was an added bonus. Kakashi may have made them promise no direct retribution, but he'd said nothing about not getting it in more oblique ways. Sasuke had noted immediately when Ibiki had come into the room. He'd been on the panel that had interviewed the three of them when Kakashi had been under review, so they'd done their best to acquire all available intelligence on him. There hadn't been much, other than that he was the head of Konoha's torture and intelligence section. His mind quickly flipped through all of what that could mean for the test and what he could do to further their chances of success. "Alright maggots, I'll only explain the rules to this test once, so listen up and listen good," Ibiki began. Sasuke took a moment to appreciate he'd drawn the correct conclusion before paying strict attention to what he was saying. In the next room are a series of numbered workstations containing 6 cups of tea. 3 of the teas at each station are poisoned, and 3 hold the corresponding antidotes. Any single cup of poison drunk without the correct antidote taken immediately probably will not be strong enough to kill one of you. 2 cups of poison likely will. He looked around the room to let this sink in, and Sasuke wondered if he was telling the truth. He was likely the single most difficult person to read that Sasuke had ever met, and he doubted whether even Naruto could get a good reading off him unless the older man permitted it. In addition to the tea, each team will start off with 10 points in a box. All of the boxes are identical, and each contains information about the poisons at their station. Your test will end only when all 6 cups have been consumed, or when a team has lost all of their points. Only the teams with the highest number of points will pass and be allowed to proceed, so if don't want to fail right off the bat, pay attention. We don't have all day, so you lose 3 points every 10 minutes. Consider it incentive to work fast. Ibiki's grin looked more vicious than reassuring, but Sasuke supposed that it was intended to. In addition, if your box is damaged in any way, you lose 8 points. If your box is opened without damage, a team gains 5 points. If any of you are caught cheating, you lose 3 points. If any member of the team becomes incapacitated, the team loses 15 points. Ibiki stepped to the side and waved his hand at the table behind him, where 2 Chunin sat ready to hand out numbers. Each team will come up to the table and draw a number, which will correspond to one of the workstations set up in the next room. "Come," Ibiki ordered. "When you all have your numbers, we'll open the door to the next room and you may begin." Sasuke followed along behind Naruto and Sakura as they retrieved their Kubi assignment, considering the Jounin's words. Being told that being caught cheating would only lose them points and not disqualify them was as blatant an invitation to cheat as he'd ever heard. Though, he doubted they would have to. After all, Sakura was coming to specialize in poisons, and would continue to do so, she'd said, at least until she'd finished learning from Shizune, and the test was technically over when they drank all of the teas. Sasuke had noted, though he had wondered how many others had, that Ibiki had not promised the solution to the poison/antidote cup identification. But even if the clue inside the boxes did say which cups held poison, Ibiki hadn't mentioned anything about information on the antidotes being in the boxes. And it would do them little good to only know which tea was poison when they didn't know which antidote to mate it to, not when incapacitation meant automatic disqualification, even if that hadn't been what Ibiki had called it. And he doubted cheating would help much, no matter that it wouldn't necessarily get them kicked out if they were caught. For all that he'd said the boxes were identically, Ibiki hadn't mentioned anything about the cups containing the same thing at any given station. No, for all Sasuke knew, every poison cup in the room could contain a different type of poison, and if the arrangement of poison and antidote cups wasn't different at every Kubi, well, Sasuke was sure it was only because there were a finite number of iterations when you only had 6 variables to work with. He contemplated whether they should even attempt to open their box. It would gain them 5 points, but it could lose them valuable time. Then again, he doubted he'd be much help to Sakura in figuring out the cups, so he might as well try. After all, given how Hibiki had described them, the boxes had to be puzzle boxes, else how could there be any possibility it might take more than half an hour to open it? But, then, half an hour was not usually sufficient to solve a difficult puzzle box, not when the whole point of a puzzle box was that it wouldn't open unless you found all of the hidden panels which could be on any side of the box and could slide any number of times in any direction, and only by sliding exactly the right panels in exactly the right direction in exactly the right sequence could the box be opened without damaging it. And forfeiting 8 points. He wondered how many moves there were on the boxes. Certainly more than the 3 or 4 moves of the cheapest boxes, but it couldn't be any of the great boxes with dozens of moves, either, for with so many teams competing, the expense alone would have prevented the test from being feasible. Sasuke frowned as the memory of his father switching him for playing with one while he was supposed to be practicing with his shuriken floated through his thoughts. He frowned harder when he remembered Itachi returning the box in the middle of the night, with a pot of liniment for the marks on his legs hidden inside, and soft words telling him to hide it carefully. Shaking his head once, he put the memory aside along with the thought of the box's current hiding place in his bedroom in Kakashi's house. And he absolutely refused to allow his mind to drift to thoughts that, before he'd gone insane and killed their entire family, Itachi had been much kinder to him than their father ever had been, for that waylay madness. He'd flirted with madness in the past, of course, and likely would from time to time for years to come. But the middle of the Chunin exams was not an appropriate time to examine how far a slide he'd taken this time. Naruto lightly bumped into him, a wordless expression of support that wouldn't be noticed by any of the others. Because of course he'd noticed something was wrong. It was somewhat annoying that he couldn't hide it from Naruto, or Sakura, he noted, as she leaned into his personal space, but the easy strength and comfort they freely gave was more than worth the irritation. Sasuke forced it all out of his mind to concentrate on the task at hand, for Sakura had gotten their station assignment and they were all lining up to head into the testing room. "So, I'll analyze the cups while you two work on the box?" Sakura suggested, voice pitched softly so it wouldn't carry beyond their small circle. "Keep careful watch over them," Naruto pointed out, surveying their opponents. "I'm sure some of these folks wouldn't mind adding a few things to some of the teas to make certain to get rid of the competition." Sasuke made a few minuscule hand signs that indicated he would take the target, and that Naruto should work on intelligence. It wasn't a perfect corollary to what they were doing, but then, sign language never was, and there weren't really signs for, "I'll work on figuring out the puzzle box while you try to cheat without getting caught." Naruto quickly signed back in the affirmative though, so he wasn't concerned the message had been mistaken. They'd barely agreed to their small plan when the doors into the examination room opened. "Begin," Hibiki ordered them all, and the Genin all made a mad dash to their assigned workstations. Team 7 was no different. Sasuke wasn't certain what he'd expected the workstations to be like, but it certainly hadn't been this. There was row after row of tables laid out with mathematical precision, each surrounded by the cubicle walls he'd previously only seen in the bowels of the administrative building he'd had to visit to reclaim the Uchiha district after a particularly greedy foster had tried to have it raised for a building project the foster would have benefited from enormously. The cubicle walls were cheap and flimsy, and would barely stand up to a determined toddler much less trained Genin teams, but he supposed that was likely the point. He thought it highly probable that a good quarter of the teams would get frustrated enough to destroy their entire workstation, so cheap made sense. And that the teams had been invited to cheat, they needed some pretense of security so that the worst of the teams would be weeded out either through other teams sabotaging them or through being overly obvious in their own cheating and sabotage attempts. All in all, Sasuke approved, even as he abhorred the stupid walls and the memories associated with them. Then he considered that the foster was currently working behind walls just like these in the sub-basement of some unimportant office building instead of his previously prestigious position, and reconsidered his dislike of cubicles. Sasuke's eyes flit over the room and found the number on their chit at a fraction of the time it would have taken normal eyes. There were more benefits to having Uchiha eyes than just the Sharingan, after all. But a movement caught right at the edge of his vision made his eyes flash with it. The blade moving to Naruto's unprotected side seemed to move in slow motion as Sasuke reacted with all of the speed and skill Kakashi-sensei had beaten into him. He saw Naruto moving before it happened, saw he would grab the enemy's wrist, twisting and bending it as he moved so the kunai wound up in the attacker's own side. So Sasuke was moving in easy concert, following Naruto's measures with his own as he broke the boy's arm in 3 places. The attacker screamed once, pitifully, as Sasuke finished the movement by releasing the boy's wrist and using his elbow against the boy's temple to render him unconscious. Sakura had fallen into a defensive support position, eyes monitoring the crowd for additional threats, a position so long ingrained into the three of them Sasuke didn't need to look to see where she was. The boy was falling to the floor at Sasuke's feet was the only movement in the room. Shocked silence took over for a handful of breaths before the boom of Iviki's incisive, gravelly voice broke it. Team 14, representing the village hidden in the mist, -3 points for cheating, -15 points for an incapacitated teammate. That's -8 points total. Team 14 is dismissed. Wait, what? Roared one of the Mist Jinan's teammates. I said you were dismissed, Jinan, Iviki repeated. Congratulations on being the first team knocked out of the first exam. Exit through the door to my left. When the Jinan looked ready to protest again, Iviki pulled a look. Sasuke recognized it. It was a look his father had often used. Remove your team or I will have your team removed for you. The teammate who hadn't yet spoken, the one who looked to be the oldest, standing a head taller and a good hand's width wider than Sasuke, was gave Naruto a look he knew meant trouble. But he grabbed his unconscious teammate and his still protesting one and took them from the room. Well? Iviki prompted. What are you waiting for? The remaining Jinan scrambled for their workstations even as they gave Team 7 wide berth and cautious glances. The plan stays the same, he murmured to his teammates. They nodded. I'll keep careful watch at the same time, though, Naruto pointed out. The other Mist teams look ready for our blood. Sasuke nodded and turned his focus to the box, picking it up and turning it over and over in his hands. It was a fairly standard example of the craftsmanship required to build a puzzle box. It was about the length of his hand, so Sasuke estimated it to be 4 sun. The inlaid design was a repetitive pattern of Konoha's leaf symbol. It worked to hide the lines which might otherwise help people know where the panels of wood separated, an important step in figuring out which panel to move when. He turned the box over a few more times, analyzing it, then began to work it between his fingers, testing parts to see what would move and how, and sliding panels back and forth as he prodded at the box to see if there were any pressure points that needed to be released. Right forward, turn up, left to the right, turn clockwise, left forwards, right back, turn down, panel up. Naruto was keeping a vigilant watch out to make sure nobody else would try to disable him or either of his teammates again. He was also keeping a careful eye out for any opportunities to cheat effectively. Which meant not being so ham-handed as that Mist team had been. Because, really, trying to stab him while there were 20 proctors in the immediate vicinity? Naruto barely kept from scoffing, just thinking about the attempt made his disdain for the would-be assassin come right back. His was the only role not actively engaged in passing this part of the exams, but he didn't mind being set the relatively simple duty of guarding the others while they worked. The only thing he knew about poisons was how to use them, and puzzle boxes were what the highborn used to keep secrets from each other. He briefly contemplated what would have happened if he'd ever tried to use a puzzle box to keep one of his secrets secret down in the Akasan and shook his head. Yeah, never would have worked. Stolen and or smashed in about 5 seconds flat. So that he wasn't particularly well matched to either of the tasks didn't bother him. That was why they were a team, after all. And if they'd had to do something else, say, if the task had involved persuading a target to hand over the information about the poisons, well, Naruto fancied himself a bit more suited to that than either of his teammates. But for this he was content being left the grunt work. Besides, he was better at cheating than they were. He'd already caught 4 attempts to copy Sasuke's movements with the box, and another 2 that had attempted to throw off Sakura's work. Naruto had responded with adequate distractions for the former, but he'd responded with prejudice to the latter. If she wound up messing something up, it would be her or Sasuke who would most likely be the ones hurt because of it. Naruto was pretty sure he'd come out alright no matter what, given the fox. For that matter, Naruto was inclined to ensure that the teams of the evil Jounin who tried to take Kakashi away failed miserably during the first tests, just to humiliate the Jounin. He was pretty sure that eliminating the competition was sideways enough that it wasn't necessarily direct retribution, so he'd work around his promise to Kakashi. Alright, but then, he couldn't justify the possibility of accidentally killing one of his comrades. No matter how annoying he found some of them. 10 minutes. All remaining teams are -3 points, Iviki announced. Not counting the Mist team that had tried to kill him, 26 teams had already been eliminated, 3 of them from guessing at the D and having one of their teammates collapse, another 8 from being rendered unconscious via sabotage, and about 10 from smashing the box, hoping it would have the answers then being caught cheating when they realized it hadn't. Idiots. Another 9 teams had already completed the exam. For 4 of those teams, one of the members had just drunk all 6 cups almost immediately. The two teams had simply analyzed the cups quickly enough to drink them before the 10 minutes were up. Naruto noted all 6 teams as having poison specialists for future reference. He was making a careful survey of the remaining teams. There were about 65 teams left. Of them, he guessed a good 15 would let time run out before picking a tea out of fear of accidentally killing themselves. Another dozen would likely be eliminated for their cheating within the next 10 minutes. The rest Naruto estimated had a fair chance of passing, but with the skill of a number of the saboteurs, he thought probably only 15 to 20 would actually make it. Of the other evil Konoha Jounin teams, surprisingly, he found that Kurenai's team would likely be one of the next to pass. Hinata had used her eyes to see through the box for the clue, and then he'd watched Shino use his bugs to test the various tea combinations. He gave them another 10 to 12 minutes before they were ready to drink them themselves. Neji had done the Hyuga eye trick, too, but as they had no poison specialists, he wasn't sure what their plan was. Team 10 wasn't doing poorly, but could have done better. Shikamaru had fiddled with the box until it was open, but Ino and Kuuji hadn't done anything to analyze the tea until after they had the clue. He shook his head at the waste of time. A soft hiss of satisfaction from Sasuke at minute 18 indicated he'd succeeded in opening the box. Naruto didn't dare turn to look, now it was more important than ever to keep watch over what was going on outside their workstation. He averted 5 attempts to see what Sasuke had pulled out of the box, 3 of which resulted in the teams being eliminated. "Switch," Sasuke said, handing over the box to him. Naruto was startled for a moment, until he saw the scroll Sasuke had left on the table for him, and it became obvious Sasuke wanted him to seal the box away. He wasn't sure why Sasuke wanted to take the box with them, as none of the other teams thus far had bothered, but he was sure Sasuke had his reasons. Probably. And though they hadn't been explicitly forbidden from taking the boxes, neither had they been granted permission. Probably prudent to hide it, then. He quickly drew a storage seal lock to open only to members of Team 7A, a ridiculously easy security feature he'd been shocked so many people didn't bother with. But then, he guessed there weren't too many teams with a sealing specialist, so it would probably be a lot more expensive to get custom-made storage scrolls. Their loss. It was a matter of moments for him to activate the seal and roll the scroll up, and a handful more to reverse pickpocket Sasuke to stick it in his storage pouch. "Done," Naruto told him. Sasuke took his eyes off of the room only long enough to give him a disgruntled look, saying without words that he knew very well that Naruto's hands had been in his pockets, and even if he didn't feel it and couldn't catch it, Naruto should know better by now. Naruto only grinned. 20 minutes, Ibiki announced. All remaining teams are -3 points. 3 teams were kicked out at this announcement. Naruto did some quick math. 10 to start, -6 for time passing, +5 for opening the box left them with 9 points. Sakura had 30 minutes to figure it out. Between he and Sasuke, they managed to get 2 teams enraged to the point they smashed their boxes, which at that point meant instant disqualification. 1 team to drink the tea before they were actually ready, leading to the incapacitation of one of their teammates, and 1 particular hothead to attack them, so they could defend themselves without fear of losing any points, a tactic a few other teams had used in the past 25 minutes as well. Tricky, Sakura murmured. Naruto let his attention split just enough to take in Sakura's expression, her posture. Accomplishment. Relief. She'd figured it out. "Well?" he prompted. 2 of the antidotes turn into a poison if drunk together, and all of the antidotes exacerbate the symptoms of the 2 poisons they don't cure. Interestingly, though, 2 of the poisons actually counteract each other if taken together, she said. "They do like to fuck with us," Naruto said with a grunt. "We only have 2.5 minutes before we're docked 3 more points, and they haven't told us the point cutoff for actually passing. Which should we drink, Sakura?" Sasuke said. When she handed them out, Naruto gave them both a grin. "Kampai." He toasted them, then drank one after another, barely taking a breath. His teammates followed suit, and they presented themselves to Ibiki for inspection. 9 points, he said, giving them a chit with the number 9 written on it. "Pass through the door behind me." They went through the door in careful formation, well aware that the teams who'd already completed could be ready to further thin out the competition. Instead, they found a table with 3 Konoha Jounin waiting for them and nobody else. "Chit?" one of them demanded. Sasuke held it up cautiously. "Good. Make sure you hold on to it. Next exam is at the Forest of Death and begins in 2 hours. You'll give the chit to the proctor when you get your assignment. Now get out of here." "I see," Sakura said. The points didn't matter then, or only mattered in the negative? One of the Jounin grinned. "And made sure everyone wanted to get done as quickly as possible," she said. Now scram. And as they raced to the Forest of Death, Naruto noted he wasn't the only one of them grinning madly. They were going to trounce this entire exam. You passed 38 teams? Anko asked. I thought you were going to make your test hard. You'll note that twice that number failed, Ibiki pointed out. And that only half the remaining teams are foreign. What's the breakdown of that? Taka asked. 5 mist, 4 sand, 3 cloud, 3 grass, and 1 each from sound, waterfall, rain, and haze, Ibiki answered. Get rid of sound and haze immediately in the second exam, Taka ordered. A new village and one known for its stupid ninja can't go forward. Agreed. Of the rest, make sure no more than 1 team per village is allowed to proceed. Understood. The members of Team 7 had been sizing up the other teams as they waited for the exam to begin. Naruto had surreptitiously pointed out to his teammates the few he'd marked as poison experts in the first exam. At Sasuke's signal, Naruto and Sakura's attention shifted to the Konoha examiners, who had gathered together and appeared almost ready to start. All right, you brats, shut up and listen, a woman with purple hair began, cutting through the assembled genins' chatter easily. I'm Mitarashi Anko, Chief Examiner for the second phase of these Chunin exams. In a few moments, we'll be assigning each team a randomly selected entrance gate into training ground number 44, also known as the Forest of Death. The goal of this exam is to survive the forest and each other until you acquire 25 points, then make it to the tower in the middle of the forest within 5 days and with all of your teammates alive and conscious. She paused there and smiled a wicked grin. All of you got a wooden token with a number burned into it at the end of the last exam. If you lost it, you're screwed and it's not my problem, so don't come whining to me, she said. Naruto's eyes were scanning the crowd to see which of the Genin made tells that they were holding on to their little pieces of wood. He was pleased to have caught about 10 of them out at it, and even more pleased that Sasuke made no move at all. Numbers on your chits range from 2 to 10, and that number is how many points it's worth. And in this exam, anything goes for getting those tokens from each other. Now get your asses in line so I can start giving you your entry gates. Oh, and by the way, you'll also have to sign waivers. Wouldn't want to get in trouble in case any of you die. Naruto held back a giant grin as Anko finished her explanation. No mention was made of having to fight for the chits, or even of them having to obtain them while they were in the forest. So while everyone was milling around, waiting for everyone else to sign the waiver forms and get their gate assignments, Naruto went to work. I have a plan, Naruto said, voice low. Sakura and Sasuke gave him their full attention. Just follow along with me as we get into line, and signal me if anyone starts looking at me too hard, alright? Sasuke narrowed his eyes but didn't protest as Sakura nodded. Naruto took a rather circuitous path as he carefully made his way through the gathered Genin, picking easy marks as he went. By the time they were at the front of the line to receive their gate assignment, Naruto had managed to pick the pockets of about 3 dozen Genin, though he'd only managed to snag 5 tokens. Got him, Naruto murmured as they ducked into the tent. You 3 are Kakashi's brats, aren't you? Anko said, giving them the eye. Sure as shit don't look like much, no matter what I've heard. Ano, there is an old shinobi proverb, Mitarashi-senpai, Sakura said, the very picture of diffidence and respect. It is a great ability to hide one's abilities. Anko snorted. Sure, kid. Whatever you say. You brats are at gate 32. Listen, for the starting gun gates will only stay open for 5 minutes, then you're either on the inside for 5 days or you forfeit. Now scram. I got 3 2s, a 7, and a 6, Naruto said quietly as Team 7 settled into place at their assigned gate. You picked their pockets, didn't you? Sakura said, shaking her head. I was even watching you and I didn't see you take them. Aha, well, you know. Naruto scratched the back of his head uncomfortably. Practice makes perfect? Sasuke snorted and Sakura just grinned. I guess it does. Good job, Naruto-kun. With our 9, that makes 28. So we should run straight for the tower, full speed, Sakura suggested. No point in getting into a fight when we already have the points. I was hoping for some serious opponents, Sasuke complained in distaste. Would you rather get into random fights or make Chunin? Naruto asked. Because we have no idea what's supposed to come after this, and I for one would rather be fresh for it. DCH, Sasuke tisked, but he didn't offer any more complaint. Then the gun sounded, and they were off. When they reached the tower 20 minutes later, jaws dropped. Iruka and the 2 other Chunin who were guarding the entrance to the tower were speechless. The Jounin watching from the monitors set up on the top floor of the tower, however, were not. 20 minutes? Kurenai was saying in disbelief. 20 minutes? How is that even possible? That doesn't just break the old record, it obliterates it. Asuma picked his cigarette up from where it had fallen out of his mouth. That should be impossible, he said. They would have had to sprint straight here from the gate to get here so quickly. There's no way they could have stopped to fight anyone for a single chit, much less 5 of them. Kakashi just smiled. The sexy and deadly Anko is now here, Anko yelled, bouncing into the room. I sure gave those twerps something to think about. So what's up? Kakashi's brats already made it, Hayate said. What? Anko shrieked. But. What? Kakashi, did you give them an extra chit? Of course not, Kakashi said, affronted at the thought that his students would need the help. Besides, even if he did, they got here with 6 of them, Asuma said, glaring at Kakashi. 6? Anko yelled. They must have cheated. Kakashi, what did you tell them? My students are exceptional shinobi, Kakashi said, projecting his displeasure in his voice. They would never have needed me to help them figure out such a simple task. Why you little? Asuma and Kurenai had to hold Anko's arms to keep her from gouging Kakashi's remaining eye out at that. But as for cheating? Kakashi shrugged. Well, all you told them was to bring 25 points worth of tokens to the tower. So really, could it have been considered cheating? But how could they have? Anko whined. I was watching them the whole time. Well, Kakashi said, rubbing his chin in thought. The others leaned in, wondering what he was going to say. They're tricky little devils. The other Jounin groaned in exasperation. They are indeed, Ibiki agreed as he entered. For not having a poison user on your team, they got through my test with the second highest score awarded. Really? Kakashi sat up at that, looking at him with ill-concealed interest. Ibiki said. A 9 is very solid. 15 were technically possible, but nobody actually got higher than a 10. And they just got here with 6 tokens. Anko complained. In under 20 minutes. Kakashi, you're creating little monsters here. Monsters? Kakashi scoffed. No, I'm creating the next leaders of Konoha. If my guess is right, they'll all be promoted to Chunin in this exam. And they'll make Jounin before they hit 15. Unless, of course, they burn my Icha collection again. In which case I'll probably have to murder them all in their beds. All the Jounin in the room blinked at him with incomprehension clear on their faces. Are they really that good? Kurenai finally asked hesitantly, wondering if she shouldn't have signed up to be a Junin sensei if this were what was expected. DCH, of course not, Asuma drawled, reassuring her. Just typical bragging. All the Junin sensei do it. Kind of an informal competition to say if my Junin are better than yours. Obviously I'm better than you. Funny, then, isn't it? Kakashi said with a smirk that reminded Ibiki of Naruto. That it's my kids who are blowing everyone else out of the water? Goodness, if the dried up old Jounin, the burnout resting on his laurels, produced kids like this, what does that say about the rest of you? Now if you'll excuse me, I have to see to my team. Ibiki got up and left with him, drawing a raised eyebrow from the copy nin. Don't mind if I tag along, right? He asked. After all, I'd like to see the great Junin sensei at work. It must have been some doing to get them to be using Anbu signs so easily it's second nature. Kakashi shrugged and continued walking. They're naturals, Kakashi said. Sasuke and Naruto will be Anbu within a year. Sakura will most likely follow, because Team 7 sticks together with everything. Better for them to start using it now and get it right than to fumble with it under some inept rookie captain. Ibiki didn't have anything to say to that. He imagined that even if he had, Kakashi would completely disregard it anyway. So, Kakashi drawled as he found the room his team had been given for use until the second exam was over. You guys made it already, hun? Of course, Naruto said. Like some wimpy tests would stop us. Sakura rolled her eyes and Sasuke grunted his agreement. Ibiki gave Kakashi a raised eyebrow. Your team's a little cocky, don't you think? It isn't arrogance if it's true, Sakura said primly. Naruto and Sasuke both snickered. Ma, that's enough, Kakashi said mildly. Ibiki was impressed at the Genin's immediate change in demeanor as they fell into line with serious expressions and alert postures at Kakashi's mild words. Report. As the Genin took turns briefing their sensei on the first 2 exams, Ibiki found his respect for them and Kakashi growing. You picked their pockets? Ibiki interrupted, finding this hilarious. Naruto looked between him and Kakashi, asking silently whether he was going to get in any trouble over that. Hey, I won't say a word, Ibiki said. I think it's great. Shows you were thinking about the best and cleanest way to achieve the mission objective instead of any personal glory. Although I have to say, it's a good thing you were only picking the pockets of Genin. If you try that with an experienced ninja, you're liable to lose your hand. Of course. Right, Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head with a foxy grin on his face. I'd never try such a thing on someone able to catch me. Oh, hey, that reminds me. I wanted to show you something I picked up from one of the Konoha Kage-sensei. Yeah, those cards were weird, Sakura agreed. Kakashi tilted his head to the side and Naruto pulled a deck of cards out of one of his many pouches and handed them over. They have information about all of the Jonin in the exam on them, Naruto said. But they only activated when Kabuto put his chakra through them. I'm not sure what'll happen if someone else tries. What kind of information? Ibiki asked, intrigued. Names, photos, abilities, number and types of missions, Sakura offered. He knew we had 2 ranks, Sasuke said. Ibiki's eyebrows raised significantly. I see, Ibiki said. Well, I'll be taking these and getting them looked at. For now, don't mention this to anyone. And Kakashi, your kids have my vote. And with that, Ibiki left the team to talk amongst themselves. What does he mean about voting? Sasuke asked. Nothing for you to be concerned with just yet, Kakashi said. For now, I can tell you that the final exam is basically a single knockout tournament that will happen in about a month. Depending on how many teams make it through Onko's test, though, we might have to have some preliminaries. Given how many tokens you 3 had, I don't think it'll be likely. Kabuto, as it turned out, was an exceptionally gifted medic nin, and an overall very smart shinobi. But he wasn't better at hiding information than the combined efforts of the torture and interrogation squad were at ferreting that information out. It had only taken them 29 hours to break the security on the cards Naruto had swiped, and only a handful more to analyze the information they contained and come to a conclusion. Kabuto was almost certainly an enemy agent. So Ibiki had taken 3 Anbu squads into the Forest of Death to lay in wait at the tower for Kabuto to show. And, though it was likely overkill, Ibiki thought it was better to be prepared than to be caught by surprise and allow him to escape back to his master. Ibiki really wanted to know who his master was and he wasn't going to take any chances. So he waited for Kabuto's team to arrive. Finally, with only a day remaining in the exam, Kabuto's team appeared at the gate and presented 26 points worth of tokens. Congratulations, Iruka told them, smiling easily as he pocketed the chits. Let me call one of the Jounin examiners to escort you to your rooms while we wait for the exam to be over? Kabuto's eyes went momentarily wide when Ibiki walked out, and Ibiki could see the worry and concern flare briefly before they were covered with innocent-looking confusion. Congratulations on making it through the second test, Ibiki said, keeping to his part as an examiner. Come with me. I'll show you where you can rest for the time that remains. Then, to put Kabuto more at ease, he turned his back on them and began to walk away. Kabuto, he knew, would follow. And as soon as they got through the door, the Anbu attacked. Kabuto and his teammates were captured bound and unconscious within moments. Ibiki grinned and ordered them brought to tea and I so he could begin his work. He broke them in under 2 days. Don't think it'll be likely my ass, Naruto muttered as the 6 teams who made it through the second exam were told about the preliminaries for the final. The new proctor, a sickly-looking special Jounin named Hayate, explained the rules. Then all of the teams went up to the observation balcony with their Jounin sensei to wait for their names to be called. Everyone watched with anticipation as the first matchup flickered on the screen, Haruno Sakura vs Inuzuka Kiba. "Aw, man," Kiba complained. "I was really hoping for a tough matchup, where I could show off my skills a little bit." "Kiba," Sakura said sharply. "Because you're a fellow Leaf Nin, I will tell you this, do not expect me to be the same little girl you knew at the academy. I am a proud kunoichi of Konoha, and to treat this match as something not worth your full skills and attention isn't only dishonorable. You'll also get hurt." "Ha!" Kiba scoffed. "Bring it on. I won't even need Akamaru for this fight." Sakura's brow furrowed briefly in annoyance before she smoothed it back out. Then they were facing each other, and Hayate was signaling them to begin. The match was embarrassingly short. For Kiba, anyway. Sakura didn't bother trying one of her genjutsu, knowing Kiba's sensei was a genjutsu mistress, and assuming, correctly, that Kurenai had taught them well how to break out of them. Instead, as Kiba made a show of yawning and cracking his knuckles, Sakura disappeared and reappeared behind him and with one senbon, put it in the pressure point in his neck that made him pass out. Kurenai dropped her head into her hands in dismay, and decided Kiba would be getting a hell week for training and a stern talking to. "Winner, Haruno Sakura," Hayate said, waving the medics into the arena to wake the boy. Sakura made her way back up to her teammates. "Good job, Sakura." Naruto congratulated her. Sasuke nodded and Kakashi gave her a one-eyed smile and a pat on the head. "Sensei." Sakura complained, smoothing her hair back and glaring, though the corners of her lips were twitching up. The rest of the Rookie Nine looked on in shock. "That was brutally efficient," Shikamaru said, re-evaluating Team 7. Sakura shrugged. "I tried to warn him," she said. And indeed, they all recalled she had. The next matchup came up on the board, drawing everyone's attention: Hyuga Neji v. Yamanaka Ino. "Good luck, Ino," Kuji said, munching on some chips. Shikamaru looked between Ino and Neji and sighed as Ino flicked her hair and sashayed her way down to the steps. "Watch me, Sasuke-kun," she said flirtatiously. "I'll." "Ino, take this seriously," Sakura said. "What? I am serious," Ino exclaimed, annoyed Sakura had interrupted her flirting with Sasuke. "I am going to win Sasuke-kun from you. Just watch me." "That wasn't what I meant, Ino." Sakura shook her head, but Ino was already marching down the stairs to the arena. "This is going to be so troublesome," Shikamaru sighed. The two opponents stood across from each other. "You are a pathetic excuse for a ninja," Neji said calmly. "These eyes, they see everything. They see how nervous you are, how unsure of yourself. They see your eyes going to the Uchiha, and know you wish acknowledgement from him above all things. Which makes you a pitiable, weak excuse for a kunoichi. You think love is more important than training, and care about your looks more than your skills. You should quit now and thank me for defeating you and showing you what a sorry, useless little girl you are." "Ma, are you going to fight or chat?" Hayate asked. "Begin." But Ino tried to protest. But Neji was already on her, connecting the devastating Juken strikes to her arms even as she tried to block. She tried her basic academy taijutsu and even a few of the more advanced ones her father had made her learn, but it was no use. Then Neji stepped back and waited. She hurried to put her fingers together in her family's signature jutsu, but no chakra would come. "I've blocked all of your chakra," Neji explained. "Such is the power of the Hyuga family. You should give up now, to avoid getting more injured." "No," Ino yelled, starting to tear up. "I won't let Sakura surpass me. I have to win, so I can win Sasuke-kun's." Neji cut her off, striking the side of her neck in a disabling blow. "Winner, Hyuga Neji," Hayate announced as Ino fell unconscious. The medics came to take her away, and Neji went back to the observation balcony. "You didn't have to say those things," Shikamaru said angrily, confronting him as he came up the steps. "I said nothing that wasn't true," Neji said, unconcerned. "Better that she know them now than on a mission where it will get her killed." "Even so, you are unnecessarily cruel," Shikamaru said. "Fate often is," Neji said, turning away. A new matchup came up on the board, interrupting the boys. Tenten v. Uchiha Sasuke. Sasuke smirked. "Have fun, team," Naruto said. Sasuke only nodded and headed down. He and Tenten stood opposite each other, waiting for Hayate to let them begin. "What, no pre-match banter?" Hayate muttered. "Fine. Begin." And both opponents began to move. Tenten began to barrage Sasuke with an overabundance of throwing weapons and some that weren't but that she threw anyway. Sasuke activated his Sharingan, knowing where each weapon was and was going to be. He dodged everything, slowly making his way towards her. She figured out his plan and suddenly jumped into the air, pulling out 2 scrolls. "You're good," she said. "I was going to try to save these for the finals, but you forced me into it." Sasuke wasn't sure what was in the scrolls, but he'd seen Naruto with enough to recognize them as summoning scrolls. So as she unrolled them and began the jutsu to cause them to spin around her in a double helix, Sasuke prepared a jutsu of his own. "Katen, Hausuka no Jutsu," Sasuke said, exhaling and shooting a dozen fireballs at her. The scrolls caught on fire and burned to ash within seconds, causing Tenten to fall out of the jutsu prematurely. She twisted herself to at least help her control her landing, but Sasuke was there, grabbing her arm and knocking her into the wall and unconsciousness. "Winner, Uchiha Sasuke," Hayate said, coughing. "Tenten," Lee cried, jumping down to help her to the medics. "That's 2 of your brats to make it to the finals," Asuma said consideringly as he dragged on a cigarette. Kakashi agreed. "You appear to have trained your students very well, my rival," Guy said. "We should never have doubted you," Kakashi sighed, wishing Guy hadn't said that within hearing range of the kids. "Kakashi-sensei is the best," Sakura defended loyally. "Why would you ever question his ability to train us?" Naruto asked. "It's not like you guys were able to produce anything spectacular," Sasuke scoffed, looking in particular at Kiba and Ino. who'd been returned from the medics after she'd woken up. Asuma raised both eyebrows as Kurana flushed and Guy frowned. Ma, that's enough, kids, Kakashi said mildly. I can take care of myself, you know. All three Genin frowned at him, then exchanged glances before nodding. They'd deal with it after the exam. Good match, by the way, Kakashi said, ruffling Sasuke's hair. DCH, he dismissed the words as he looked down. But he didn't move away. And Sakura and Naruto subtly moved in between Kakashi and the other Jounin, still glaring at them. Being Jounin, they didn't miss the interplay or its significance. The board announced another match, drawing their attention away. Sabaku no Gaara v. Tamachi Hitsuke. So do we know anything about either of these guys? Shikamaru asked. Sabaku no Gaara is the youngest child of the Kazekage, Naruto supplied. His teammates are his older siblings Temari and Kankuro. The gourd Gaara carries holds sand he uses in his main attacks. He's a highly dangerous opponent who will not hesitate to kill you. His sister Temari specializes in wind jutsu used in concert with her giant fan, and his brother Kankuro is a puppet master. Everyone but his team looked at him in surprise. It wasn't that Team 7 had gotten quite used to him having strange and unexpected knowledge, though they had, but rather that he'd already shared all of his recon intel on the potential opposition with them. Tamachi Hitsuke is a Rain-nin, he continued. He has no specialty, and is only average in nin, gen, and taijutsu. His teammates make up for this lack on missions, but in one-on-one fighting, it puts him at a disadvantage. He's probably only made it this far because his older brother is on the team, Tamachi Kichiro. Now he's one to look out for. Take care if he opens his umbrella, he uses it for area effect attacks. His other teammate is Hidana Kiku, who specializes in poisons, as she's immune to most of them through one of Rain's bloodlines. She's very smart, but doesn't have much in the way of chakra. How do you know all that? Shikamaru finally asked. Naruto shrugged. I'm a ninja. It's my job to know these things about my opponents, he said. Do you mean to tell me none of you did any recon on your potential opposition? What have your sensei been teaching you if you don't even know the importance of gathering intelligence? Sakura asked, feigning innocence even as she got the swipe in. But when did you have time? Kuji asked, confused. There are benefits to getting to the tower early, Naruto said. And we've been here the whole 5 days. As the opponents met on the arena floor, Gaara began to speak, drawing the attention of those on the balcony to him and away from Naruto. Mother wants your blood, he said, voice low but able to carry throughout the arena. You are going to prove my existence. Begin, Hayate said. The Rain-nin rushed him, hoping for a quick victory against the obviously unstable boy. Left jab, roundhouse kick, right knife hand. But Gaara's sand met each strike, and he didn't even have to move. It went on this way for a time, as the Rain-nin became more and more frustrated. Finally, he jumped back, panting and wondering what else he could do to defeat Gaara. My turn, Gaara said, sand pouring out of his gourd and rushing towards Hitsuke. Desert coffin. Hitsuke tried to dodge the sand, but was too slow, and he was shortly enveloped. No. One of the Rain-nins on the balcony yelled, trying to jump down. That's Tamachi Kichiro, Naruto murmured. Desert funeral, Gaara said, closing his fist as the sand smashed the nin it held inside. No. Kichiro screamed. Hitsuke, Hayate, Anko, and Ibiki were between Gaara and Hitsuke, dispelling the sand. Ino, Kuji, and Kiba all got sick at the sight of Hitsuke's broken body. Sakura flinched and looked away. Sasuke and Naruto, standing on either side of her, shifted closer so that they brushed against her, offering what comfort they could. Winner, Sabaku no Gaara, Hayate said quietly. Gaara only stared at him. Go back to your team, Gaara-san. Gaara looked to Hitsuke, then back to Hayate. Anko came to stand slightly behind and to the left of him, so she was able to support and not be in the way if it came down to it, as Gaara was clearly unstable. Ibiki was bent over the broken body, checking for a pulse. As the medics came out, he shook his head. Hitsuke was dead. No, Kichiro yelled, finally breaking free from his teammate and sensei's grip and rushing the floor. He was over to his brother in a moment, shoving past Ibiki to cradle his body in his arms. The arena was silent. Finally, he allowed the medics to take his brother's body away and he slowly stood up, glaring at Gaara the entire time. I am going to kill you, he said. You will prove my existence, Gaara said. Maybe, but not now, Hayate interrupted. For now, we gotta finish up these matches. So if you two are gonna kill each other, you're gonna have to wait for a while. And if you're gonna do it, Please wait till you're in a sanctioned match or you're outside of Konoha on fire. It would be a pain to deal with the paperwork involved if you kill each other otherwise. Kichiro trembled and glared, then shuddered and seemed to get himself under control, ignoring Gaara and the rest of the world as he headed back up to the observation balcony. Gaara pulled his sand back into his gourd, then joined his siblings. The next match came up on the board, Hyuga Hinata v. Sabaku no Tamari. "Aw, man, good luck, Hinata," Kiba said, slapping her back. Hinata stumbled a bit at the force. "Do your best," Shino said, nodding to her. "Keep Naruto's information on her in mind." "Hi, Shino-kun," she stuttered. "Begin," Hayate said when they were both down there. "This is my fan," Tamari said, planting it in front of her with a flourish. "When you see 3 stars, you'll know it's over." Hinata nodded, not in agreement so much as acknowledgement that she'd heard. Then she attacked, rushing forward in an attempt to engage Tamari in hand-to-hand. But Tamari was having nothing to do with it. "One," she said, opening her fan part of the way to reveal a purple circle. She swept her fan, causing wind to blow through the arena, pitching Hinata back and away. "Is that all you've got, little girl?" Tamari asked snidely. As Hinata got up, she used her body to hide her hands as they ran through a series of hand seals. "Force deceit," she said softly as a massive force sprang up around them, covering the entire arena. "Genjutsu," Tamari spat. "Kai." But it wasn't enough to dispel the technique. She tried again, then felt a hand slapping her arm and jumped away. Tamari shook it, trying to get the feeling back. When she couldn't, she realized she'd have to get serious. "You're making me show you all 3 stars sooner than I expected," Tamari said. She couldn't see Hinata, but with her wind jutsu, she didn't need to. She flicked her fan and it fell all the way open, 3 large purple circles prominently displayed. "Desert windstorm," she yelled, twisting around with her fan, blowing massive gusts of wind around the entire arena. Even those in the observation balcony had to steady themselves. Sakura grabbed Ino by the collar as she went flying past him, and Kakashi gave a raised eyebrow to Asuma, as though to say, "And you were questioning my teaching?" Hinata was caught in the brunt of it and, though she tried to reinforce her feet with chakra, the wind was too strong and tore her away, throwing her into a wall so quickly she wasn't even able to control her landing. She hit her head and was knocked out. Her genjutsu dispelled. "Winner, Sabaku no Tamari," Hayate said. The medics took Hinata away. "That was quite a genjutsu for a rookie Jinan to pull off," Kakashi said. "She was more than able and ready for it," Kurenai said defensively. "Kakashi-sensei was trying to give you a compliment, Kurenai-san," Sakura said. "Sakura," Kakashi reprimanded gently. "But Kaka-sensei," Sakura tried, but she cut herself off at his look. "Sorry, sensei. Your students are very protective of you," Asuma drawled, looking at the 4 of them. Kakashi gave one of his one-eyed smiles. "A team that doesn't care for each other is worthless," was all Kakashi said. Then the board showed the next matchup, Tamachi Kichiro v. Lee. "You should forfeit," Kichiro told Lee. "I will be going to the finals to kill that bastard who killed my brother. If I have to kill you to do it, I won't hesitate." "Yosh, how unyouthful," Lee said, shaking his head. "I shall not forfeit before I've had a chance to show my flames of youth. I will avenge my brother," Kichiro said. "It's your funeral if you get in my way." "Begin," Hayate said. Lee shot forward in a burst of speed, but Kichiro was already in the air, opening one of the umbrellas on his back. "Senbon shower," Kichiro called, and the umbrella began rapidly spinning as it rained down senbon. To the surprise of most of those gathered, Lee was fast enough to dash back and forth, dodging the senbon as they fell. When the jutsu stopped, Lee smiled and gave a thumbs up. "Yosh, that was truly a fearsome jutsu, Tamachi-san," Lee said. "But I, Lee began to sway. "But no matter how fast you were, you couldn't avoid being scratched by at least one," Kichiro said, dropping back down to the floor and returning his umbrella to its place on his back. "Examiner, it's over." And Lee fell over, unconscious. Guy jumped down from the balcony to see to Lee's injury. "Winner, Tamachi Kichiro," Hayate said. "Poison, of course," Guy said, looking to Kichiro, who nodded. "Can we have the antidote? Do you have an antidote to my brother being dead?" Kichiro asked bitterly. "Tamachi-san, my student had nothing to do with." "There is no antidote," Kichiro said. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the Rainin, who had clutched at one of the straps on his chest. Naruto would have bet good money that he was touching the antidote. "He'll die within a few hours." "Tamachi-san," Guy cried. "That is..." Guy, the Hokage censored him. shaking his head. Guy clenched his teeth in his fists, then deflated and helped the medics with Lee. Kichiro coldly turned away and began to make his back way up the stairs to the observation balcony. Naruto narrowed his eyes and made sure to be standing just enough in the middle of the balcony to be in the way. "Move, twerp," Tamachi sneered as he pushed Naruto out of the way. "Watch it, jackass," Naruto retorted, slipping an arm around Sakura's waist and a hand into her pouch. A few moments later she signaled to Kakashi that she needed a bathroom break and headed towards the back hallway. As soon as she was out of sight, she used a simple henge to look like any other medic, then broke into a sprint to catch up to Guy and the medics as they carried Lee away to the medical facility. When she saw him, she was reminded of the Konoha team she had tried to help in Wave. Lee was ashen, and his breathing was badly labored. She extended her fingers to Lee's ankle to get a read on him and found his organs were in the beginning stages of shutting down. The Rain-Nin had been right. Lee would certainly die within the next few hours unless he were administered the antidote. That Naruto had slipped a few vials into her bag was great, but she was still in training and didn't have time to analyze anything before she would be missed. And if people caught her doing it, questions about how she'd gotten the antidote would be raised. It was a moment's work to put Lee's body into temporary stasis, no a true one, of course, as that would have taken more time and concentration than she had while they were running, but one that should slow everything down until help could get there. Then Sakura bit her lip, then regulated her vocal cords and tried to take on the demeanor of all of the medics she'd been training with recently. "If it's poison, we must get Shizune-senpai," she said, mimicking to the best of her ability. "She's by far the most experienced with poisons in all of Konoha." "Yosh, I shall retrieve Shizune-san for you immediately," Guy yelled. "Wait, give her these antidotes, Joun and Shama," she ordered Guy, falling back from the group to catch him before he darted off. "They may be of some use in your student's case. Now go." She blinked in surprise as he disappeared so quickly Sakura could hardly believe he hadn't used a jutsu. Then she waited for the medics taking Lee to turn a corner before she dropped the henge and began the sprint back to the preliminaries, getting back just as she heard Shikamaru's match being announced. "So, what did I miss?" she asked, forcing herself to regulate her breath. Kakashi gave her a piercing look which she refused to meet even as she signed mission complete to Naruto and Sasuke. "Shino and Kuuji finished," Sasuke said. His Kikai bugs drained Kuuji when he used one of his family's multi-size jutsu. After that, Kuuji basically forfeited. And now Shikamaru's up against the other Rain-Nin, Hidana Kiku. Hayate just let them begin. Sakura nodded and gave him a smile then turned to watch the fight. "This is so troublesome," Shikamaru sighed. "Fighting against a girl. What, you think Kunoichi can't be good ninja?" Kiku asked harshly. "Well, I'll just have to disabuse you of that notion." She threw something to the ground at Shikamaru's feet and, even as he jumped out of the way, it exploded into a cloud of smoke too thick for regular eyes to penetrate. Sakura wondered at the strategy of the Rain-Nin, who was leaning against the wall looking at her nails. When the smoke cleared, Shikamaru was on the ground, not moving. Ino gasped and Kuuji dropped his chips. "That wasn't a regular smoke bomb, you leaf chump," Kiku scoffed as she went over to check to make sure Shikamaru was out. "It was filled with poison gas. Guess you should have been more concerned about a mere Kunoichi, hun." She was pulling back a leg to kick him in the ribs when Shikamaru's shadow jumped out, catching hold of her. "What?" she asked. Shikamaru rolled over off of his stomach and sat up, revealing the bandana he'd tied around his nose and mouth. "I knew you were a poison expert, and likely to try something like that," Shikamaru explained. "So as soon as the smoke hit, I kept to the ground where there was the least of it and took as few breaths as possible. Then when it cleared, you were overconfident, and all I needed to do was let you get close enough that you couldn't escape my shadow. Now, this is troublesome, but just follow along." And Shikamaru did a light back flip, but Kiku's nearness to the wall forced her to knock herself out as she mimicked Shikamaru's movements. "Winner, Nara Shikamaru," Hayate said, a bit surprised. "Troublesome," Shikamaru muttered, shuffling back to the balcony. "Well, guess that leaves me and you, Kankuro," Naruto said to the Sand Ninja. Kankuro nodded, and the two began to head down even as the board lit up to display their names. Kankuro eyed Naruto as they stood across from each other, waiting for Hayate to let them begin. "You look like a brawler," he said to Naruto. "Aw, man," Naruto pouted. "Shit. You found me out." Hayate raised an eyebrow as he knew very well what Kakashi's team could do. Genma, after a few drinks, had complained loudly about the assessment he'd had to do of them. Very loudly and with enough detail that Hayate planned to give the pink one especially a fairly wide berth. "Begin." he said, leaping away. Naruto quickly darted in, using a bastardized Juken move that had Neji and Hinata gasping as he slapped a palm to the forehead of what he knew was really Kankuru's puppet. A second later, the seal he'd created for Kakashi's eye activated and completely cut off any and all chakra from being able to move through the puppet. It collapsed into so much wood and the real Kankuro fell out of the wrappings awkwardly as he was cut off from controlling the puppet's movements. "What the hell did you do to Karasu?" Kankuro demanded, but Naruto was already following up, not allowing Kankuro any time to recover or regroup. It was over quickly after that. Kankuro, having always relied on his puppets, was not a close combat expert and Naruto wasn't allowing him to get enough space between them for Kankuro to use any of his nin or genjutsu. It only took a handful of moves for Naruto to subdue him with a kunai to his jugular and a knee in his back. "Will you forfeit?" Naruto asked. "Not on your life, you leaf brat," Kankuro spat. "Well, really, it's on your life," Naruto mused, "but so be it." And he slammed the pommel of his kunai to Kankuru's head, knocking him out. Then he got up and brushed himself off, heading back to the puppet and fingering its forehead in apparent curiosity before Temari jumped down to collect it. Naruto wasn't too bothered by that, as he'd already removed the seal and any remnants of its chakra from the puppet. Before Naruto could return to his team, Hayate requested all of those who had made it to the final exam to join him on the floor. After Ino literally kicked Shikamaru off the balcony to make him line up with the others, Hayate began. "The final exam will be a single knockout tournament with a standard draw," Hayate said. "Since there are 9 of you and only 8 slots in the draw, we'll have to have one match at the beginning of the final exam to determine who moves forward into that slot. Now you'll all draw numbers from this bag to determine your place in the draw." They all took a number and Hayate filled out the draw sheet. Interesting," Hayate said, handing the sheet to the Hokage. "Ah, yes," the old man said, rubbing his chin. "This will be a very interesting tournament indeed. First round matches will include Aburame Shino v. Uchiha Sasuke, Hyuga Neji v. Tamachi Kichiro, Sabaku no Temari v. Haru no Sakura, and Sabaku no Gaara v. The winner of the last prelim, which shall be Uzumaki Naruto v. Nara Shikamaru. Best of luck to all of you." "Troublesome," Shikamaru muttered. Naruto only smiled. "I am going to train Shikamaru to within an inch of his life," Asuma warned Kakashi. "He'll be so prepared for Uzumaki the kid won't stand a chance." Kakashi said. "What was that?" Asuma rolled his eyes, and so didn't notice Kakashi's eye sharply taking note of both Shikamaru and his sensei. "The final exam will be held in 1 month's time. Your Jounin sensei will have more information for you tomorrow. Until then, you're all dismissed," Hayate said. The Jounin began to wander off, and the Jounin from foreign powers left with their teams, until only Konoha Jounin and Kakashi's team were left. Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke took up positions near the far wall, close enough to answer if called but far enough away to be considered polite. Then they waited for Kakashi. "Congratulations, Kakashi," the Hokage said. "For your entire team to make it to the finals is quite a feat. One made even more impressive by the fact that they're all rookies." "They're quick studies," Kakashi said, trying to turn aside the praise. "I could say that about many of the Jounin I've assigned to teams over the years," the Hokage said. "But none of them have ever had their entire team make it to the finals of the Chunin exam within 6 months of their becoming Jounin. Even the team I taught took close to 18 months. You should be proud of your accomplishments, and the accomplishments of your Jounin." "I certainly am. Your team makes up 1/3 of the finalists," Hayate said. "The only other team to have more than one finalist is the Sen team." "Indeed," the Hokage said. "I'm certain that a number of shinobi are reconsidering certain beliefs with this accomplishment, Kakashi." "Yeah, your brats," Asuma began, "are still here." Anko cut him off. Everyone but Kakashi and the Hokage turned to look at the Jounin leaning against the far wall and watching them avidly. "Oi, I dismissed you brats," Hayate called. Then Jounin looked up at him, then to Kakashi for direction. "Exactly," Kakashi said, giving his one-eyed grin and turning their attention back to him. "What?" Hayate asked. "You dismissed them, Hayatekohai," Kakashi said lazily as he emphasized their respective statuses in the Konoha Shinobi Corps. "But I am their commander. My students have been well versed in the code of combat and Konoha's standard operating procedures. They know that when their commander is present, they follow his orders and no one else's. I find it curious that my brats are the only ones who do." Asuma scowled and Kurenai blushed, but neither commented. "Well, since you don't need me anymore, I'll just be off," Kakashi said, signaling to his team before anyone could think to protest or make other ridiculous comments. The Hokage only smiled.
That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.